Storming Babylon.
Book 1 of the Horrors and Hoagies series. Chapter 1, The Baron's Arrival. The faded front page of a long-forgotten newspaper proclaimed in bold capital letters.
Monsoon of the century headed to New York.
Despite the looming threat, the people of New York showed rare camaraderie. Violence had ebbed, food was distributed, buildings were fortified, and people did their best to help one another. Rolling storm clouds had blown in from over the harbor as an ominous harbinger of what was to follow. The wind howled between the downtown buildings with haunting wails and battering force till the moment the rain started to fall on the populace, unlucky to be caught in the onslaught and let gloom soak into the city's soul as the people huddled for warmth in their drafty homes. The rain's endless cadence wore away at the city's inhabitants' courage, strength, and sanity. Amid the deluge, cabs still filled the downtown streets in challenge to the weather's threat to their fares. The people who worked in the city appreciated a way to and from work that would not leave them looking like drowned rats, even if the fares were highway robbery. A sleek black sedan glided through the sea of cars, deftly weaving through the cabs or other unlucky motorists as they made their way to their various places of safety and shelter. The driver tried to ignore the oppressive, uncomfortable silence, but with each passing mile, the task had grown more difficult. But each time he thought of a way to break the ice, he pushed the idea aside as it would interrupt his passengers' thoughtful contemplation of the cityscape. The driver's enormously powerful arms were at such odds with the rest of his lithe form that he looked more like a living caricature of a man with Romanian heritage. Reaching yet another forsaken stoplight had made his mood grim. Finally he had all the silence he could take.
You miss the old neighborhood? Grandfather would often speak of it like it was akin to Eden. When the city burned to ashes, he was not sure you would ever willingly return.
The sizable, well-dressed man in the back seat had been lost in thought. His attention returned to the present. His rumbling voice filled the car with its thick resonance.
Every place we've lived in this city has become a shadow of its former glory. I would visit what has remained of our old haunts, if only my memories of better days were not so bitter.
He looked out the window at the rain, trying to find familiar landmarks from his earlier days. His deep voice filled the car. The driver smirked.
Grandfather often mused that the 1830s were filled with memories he often tried to forget with the help of the bottle.
The passenger let out a sigh of exhaustion before chuckling.
Iger loved his drink, with or without an excuse.
The driver nodded, glancing at the rearview mirror before bringing up the topic that had troubled him since they had begun this long drive.
Master, this sudden arrival will worry the staff. If you would have only let me call ahead.
They would panic if you had done so. I do wish they would not fret over me so much.
The driver let slip a brief grin while shaking his head.
So says our beloved employer. The city would pull itself apart if you were not doing the good work of maintaining order.
New York would find another to keep the lights on if I were not around. Such thoughts are far more dramatic than I would ever put it.
Dramatic? Me? However you wish to put it, Master, I find myself employed by someone who torments himself whenever he can take enjoyment.
The passenger's eyes flashed an electric green at the driver, reflecting in the small rearview mirror of the vehicle.
Physician, please psychoanalyze thyself. I am not in the mood.
The passenger shook his head before becoming lost in thought again. The black car finally pulled up to the curb in front of the massive building. The huge black letters emblazoned on the building above its extensive awning announced its name, Babylon. The structure was old, even by city standards, and significant sums of money were spent to maintain it. Its Gothic metro style featured huge metallic arches across its four faces, and its peaked spire was lost well above the storm clouds. Two doormen, one young and the other older with a thick moustache, were already moving from their small booth beneath the awning toward the car as it stopped. The doormen held umbrellas over the car doors before opening them. They greeted the passengers as they exited the car, saying, "Welcome back to Babylon, sirs." The passenger slid out of his seat and brushed off his pants with a grace and ease that was rare for someone of his stature. The mustachioed doorman was tall, but the giant of a man was a head taller than him, forcing the doorman to extend his arm fully upward to hold the umbrella over the man's head without touching it.
"Welcome home, Lord Stein,"
the doorman offered. The driver motioned toward the trunk, saying,
"Please ensure the trunk's contents will be taken to the office,"
before handing the mustached man the key to the vehicle. Both doormen nodded and hurried back out to park the car and unload its contents efficiently. Driver in tow, Lord Stein approached the entrance to his building. As he approached the revolving glass doors, a young boy rushed out from within them, colliding with the giant in his hurry. Something had pricked his large arm before the young lad disappeared into the rain. His thoughts wandered as he and Dr. Artem Koslov passed from the cold and damp exterior through the large rotating glass doors of Babylon and into its lobby. The classically styled vaulted space was ornately decorated in a charming old-world style. The lobby was decorated in gold and ivory, with a massive crystal chandelier hanging high above the checkered floor. 2 rows of thick marble pillars framed a central burgundy carpet, leading to a large desk staffed by 2 attractive women. Elegant stairs wound around the far desk and disappeared from view. A few employees were chatting in a row of seats that stretched along one wall. All lobby occupants stood at attention and bowed as the men passed by. Worried faces glanced at one another before returning to their posts. The 2 identical women staffing the desk at the end of the lobby curtsied in their matching polka-dotted attire before greeting the tall man in unison.
"Welcome back, Lord Stein. We had not expected your return until the next meeting."
The women greeted the doctor warmly, saying,
"We hope you are well, Dr. Koslov. We will contact the kitchen directly to prepare evening meals for both of you. It may be simple, as we were not expecting you to arrive so soon."
One of the women drew a leather-bound itinerary from behind the lip of the desk and handed it to her partner. It was open to a page noting Lord Stein's schedule, using moon phases to note the passage of time. After a critical review of the page and a glance at a small standing calendar at the desk, they looked at each other with a fracture of worry cracking their professional demeanor. Lord Stein's professional life was regulated to a precise clockwork of comings and goings. Everyone in the building knew this and worked with the understanding such a thing should not change. Unless something was dreadfully wrong.
Storming Babylon Chapter 1 Part 2.
Adam scratched absent-mindedly at the area where the youth had bumped into him. His damp clothing and chilled body had been enough to ignore the persistent itch before, but he noted its increasing presence by the moment. Dr. Koslov, still at the desk, made a bid to calm the twins.
"Do not worry, we have come to see to minor affairs before the next meet. And besides, this place looks like a well-oiled machine. Now that our business has concluded in Europe, you may be seeing far more of us than you had been accustomed to.
It would overjoy us to be of greater service to the Baron anytime he needs."
A wet cough boomed through the lobby of the Babylon, shocking everyone in attendance. Koslov turned to find the source. He paled when he found Lord Stein gripping his chest and beginning to heave. Stein's usually tan complexion had grown frighteningly pale and could not find a breath. The twins immediately produced a glass of water and placed it in Koslov's hand, who tried to get his master to drink it. Panic spread through the lobby like wildfire as Stein continued to struggle, barely registering the ministrations of his doctor. Finding a moment after a hard-won breath, Stein downed the water clumsily. He was suddenly racked with another violent coughing fit. Koslov offered the man his handkerchief to cover his mouth, which he took with desperate abandon. Koslov quickly ushered his master to the nearby elevator and impatiently smashed the call button. In the half-minute it took for the car to arrive, he checked over his ailing master for any injuries and noticed his handkerchief was stained with thick, ropey saliva and bright, worryingly dark blood. Koslov had known something like this was possible. There had been a good reason he had stayed by Stein's side for decades. But this was sudden and unexpected. He needed to get his master to the lab and complete the examination hastily. The staff of the Babylon had built a mythos around their lord for years. He was an unfailing titan, larger than life and unflappable. He was perceived as a man beyond harm or the worries of mortal men, an unchanging and ageless philanthropist who steered the helm of their business with a firm and wise hand. Seeing him brought low so suddenly shook them all to their bones. Koslov was grateful for the elevator's arrival and shuffled his master inside quickly. The ailing man's breathing suddenly went ragged as he was propped against the inside wall of the car. The doctor hit the button before uncuffing and lifting Stein's sleeve to reveal the well-scarred arm beneath. Normally, the scars and stapling lining each one were of no concern. The real worry was the faint scent of decay and the black bruising spreading from a series of tiny spots in his forearm. It had all the signs of advanced necrosis. He concluded that it must be limb rejection due to some infection from an external source. The elevator chimed and the doors opened into the darkness of Stein's office. A torrent of rain assaulted the wall of glass opposite the elevator. A flash of lightning gave the room a sense of brief detail. Black marble walls boasted white veins. Leather sitting chairs faced one another before an imposing office desk, itself abutted by a small table hosting fine brandy and crystal glasses. Doors to smaller rooms and the elevator lined the wall. Spartan furnishings detailed the room as a place of business, including a globe, a mounted saber, and a pair of busts on plinths. Koslov hefted Stein's arm over his shoulder and carried his massive employer through the office to the imposing desk. During the journey, Stein had the opportunity to see the state of his arm.
It's a shame. This one had the finest fingers. The best I've had the pleasure to use in a century.
Koslov gently placed him in one of the nearby chairs and grumbled.
You should have let me check you over before we left.
Doctor, while I do not possess the same skill in medical matters you do, I can assure you that if I had thought my body was in such a sorry state, I would have told you.
Koslov went about his evaluation with calm determination.
I'll need to get you an immediate replacement. I am sure someone nearby would be available who could provide. However, in the interest of expediency, it may involve methods you no longer condone.
Stein was recovering rapidly from his fit, enough that he caught the implication of Koslov's words.
No, there will be no returning to the old ways, Artem. We do not prey on the innocent. We follow my father's code.
Koslov's brow furrowed as he poured brandy into a pair of glasses.
Ino-san? Master, this is New York. I am sure we could find someone within a block who falls well outside your stipulation.
On his way to offer Stein a glass, his hand slid under the lip of the desk and depressed a hidden button. He sat across from his master as the desk slid to one side. A steel slab on an expanding assembly rose from the floor to replace the desk. Various trays and drawers were attached to the bottom of the slab. Once it locked into place, a ring of theater lights above shocked the room, bathing the slab in a sterile light. The soft buzzing from pumps and battery priming filled the large void in the office as a backdrop to the continuing conversation. Stein continued.
Father never harmed anyone. He took from the dead in a quest to aid the living up to his very death. In my heart, I know he was right in this decision.
Artem continued.
You have had many hearts since your father met his untimely end, Master. Perhaps your mind has changed more than your heart.
Your sarcasm will not sway me, Artem. No robbery, no theft, and no murder. We are above that now. I am forever haunted by the years I spent stealing the lives and limbs of others without thought of who came to harm. These recent decades have been a boon. They have been an opportunity to contribute better things to the world around us. Don't throw away our attempt to be better than we were.
Your morals may be your undoing, Master. I fear for you.
Not morals per se, but seething hatred for what I know your family and I once were. I will no longer use my father's lessons for such savagery. His painstaking lessons gave me life, but I had to fight and learn, as all men must, to rise above the thing I once was. I have attained so much inspiration from our meager beginnings. So no, we find another way, and we must do it before the meeting.
Ha! The only thing we will be doing is surgery. As far as the rest, I doubt I will do what I can before the meet.
Artem stated with as much finality as he could muster. Adam tried to protest, but the doctor raised a hand to forestall any argument.
Once your arm is off, you are staying here to rest, to prepare. The full moon is only a few days off now.
Artem spared a glance out the window in hopes of finding the moon. His only reward was knowing its location. The rain prevented him from seeing any detail. As Artem began his ritual of scrubbing in before surgery, his thoughts turned dark.
People today still call your father a necromancer because of that unflattering account by the Shelley girl.
He said.
They've never pitied us, just blindly hated us for a man's noble intentions. The unthinking masses cry out for blood when they feel the pull of the mob mentality. They did it to our fathers, and they will do it to us, given time.
Artem shook his hands and put on an apron.
To them, everything we do is evil.
The giant of a man tried to compose his thoughts.
Easily manipulated people should not be a target of your hate. Such people will be with us until the end of time. Even if I desired to fight them, they would simply overtake me through sheer numbers and the swift breeding of their ideas. They choose to remain ignorant, because the alternative may drive them mad. Truth is not kind to one's sanity, after all.
Artem offered his hand to his lord, who used it to rise from his chair. The doctor guided Stein to the slab before helping him up on it.
Time to care for your arm, master.
Chapter 2. Making a Call.
Artem lit another cigarette as he stared out of the rain-slick window in Lord Stein's office. It was a terrible habit he had picked up before the war. He knew the things were called coffin nails by those who had an inkling as to their nature. He had penned 3 papers on their effects on the respiratory system, making him one of those people. He tried to kick the habit after the war. Lord Stein had been adamant about their exclusion from the office after learning of their effects. He cut back until he found himself smoking only when meeting with his Morticians' Guild. Every mortician and cold storage supervisor in the city smoked like a chimney, and so he did while in their presence. The thing was, once addicted, the comfort they provided took the edge off of one's nerves. This was something he needed badly. The bloody tools, tainted bandages, and pans coated in dark ochre surrounding him reminded him just how sharp that edge could be. Everything below Lord Stein's elbow had been disposed of. It had all been rotten. It appeared to have been rotting for some time, deep into the bone and muscle, only to surface today as sepsis ran its course. Artem concluded the limb had been starved of vital nutrients and fresh blood. It had more wilted than anything else, allowing infection and necrosis to take hold. The limb could have lasted another 100 years if given what it needed to survive. A rather fascinating side effect of the reanimation process that had created Lord Stein was the halting of his physical aging processes. This effect was so potent it had affected his replaced parts from his earliest days if Grandpapa Igor's journals were to be believed. Igor Koslov, Dr. Frankenstein's assistant, had kept cryptic journals that survived the fire that ended his life. Igor had always been fond of secrets and misdirection, which went hand in hand with his flexible moral compass when he acquired materials for his master's work. Artem recalled how his father had made Igor seem like a larger-than-life figure. He was a doctor's assistant who was second to none, but his unfortunate deformity had caused him to be rejected by every prominent medical practitioner until he applied to study under Baron von Frankenstein. The story told to young Artem started with a chance meeting between the brash young doctor and Igor in a rural European tavern. Frankenstein traveled the world searching for a solution to a malady he strove to cure: death. Father had loved to embellish the tale but always noted that a few drinks and some merriment later, the two had become fast friends and Igor had found a master. Igor started calling the younger Stein master, in a joking manner at first. But as their friendship deepened, the sincerity of the word grew more apparent. And Artem's father continued the practice even though Adam was not a lord by blood and only seen as an adopted son at the time. Stein chose not to pursue his father's title until much later in his life. Stein reluctantly allowed the moniker to stick after years of insistence, making it the de facto relationship between Stein and Artem's family. Artem found the reasoning sound. Baron Frankenstein was not only a nobleman, but an idealist, one who was willing to do whatever it took to save humanity. The world was, and is, filled with all manner of supernatural threats. Humanity was also no friend to its continued existence, as proven by 2 world wars and the calamitous technology developed during those dark times. If true solutions to the human condition were not explored, the species would cease to exist. Lord Stein's plan was a long-term one that would take decades or even centuries to bear fruit. Instead of a small group of rogue scholars and scientists making breakthroughs regardless of societal norms, he wanted to get all of society involved. After all, millions of minds working towards a common goal have infinitely more potential for success. Mary Shelley's fictionalized accounts of Frankenstein's tragedy were widely read. She painted a darker picture of the late Baron's affairs to justify the actions of the people who had come to end him. However, her portrayal of the event was accurate. The people of the local area, under the influence of ignorance and religious fervor, stormed the estate and burned everything to the ground. Only 2 people survived that fateful night to find their separate ways in a world they barely understood. One was his master. The other is an issue best left to history. Aside from his father, Artem's family had always been skeptical of religion and eager to embrace science. Artem held little disdain for the religious himself, instead choosing to remain wary of persecution by the ignorant. Modern culture had mellowed over the years, replacing the fanatical inclinations of the church with the steadily growing belief in capitalism and the American dream. It is only at times like these that Artem wistfully desired to have faith in a comforting higher power. His chosen idol of worship was science, an uncaring power with great demands that only gave questions as a reward to those worthy of its attention. It did not care for praise or meaningless sacrifice. It demanded time, blood, and tears. Lord Stein's goals in New York over the last century had been the establishment and balance between the mortals and everyone else. He had been successful for decades forming a council of the major powers in the city. The Meet maintained a neutral platform through which those powers could seek solutions to grievances beyond bloodshed and mayhem. He had even reached out to a few mortal organizations to use them as a buffer from unfortunate breaches in the Veil. Lord Stein was wealthy, powerful, influential, and respected by every major supernatural force in the city. However, if he showed even the slightest sign of weakness, the council members at the Meet would tear him apart and leave his remains on the streets for the people to find. Artem would normally be able to retrieve an appropriate replacement from the Morticians' Guild caches within hours and have it delivered, but cold storage had become mysteriously silent. The replacements within them were vital for his master's continued health but could not be accessed in this time of need. This was predicted by the mysterious letter received hours before Lord Stein departed for Los Angeles. The letter arrived via a strange young man who was some mortal pawn for one of the city's powers, handwritten on a yellow parchment and brief in its threatening content.
Your cadre of corpse caretakers has been consumed. Your meanderings must avoid your metro meet. Dark tidings come from foreign shores.
There were many possibilities, including a trap, a labor revolt, outside interference, or even a federal raid. The replacement arm and restoration of his master's circulatory functions were of the utmost importance. If Babylon was to avoid political intrigue at the upcoming meet, both issues would need to be resolved. Artem could not afford to go and see the Morticians himself, as it was too risky. Artem knew he could not adequately resolve both issues, so he needed to call in a favor. One of the council members, a gangster named Papa Mac, had left a card offering assistance if Stein's Babylon ever needed it. Lord Stein would never take him up on his offer, as doing so would jeopardize his neutrality and cause problems with meets in the future. Artem held the card in his hand. Even touching the velour and gold-embossed card felt like a betrayal of his loyalty, but its potential solutions tugged at his conscience. He let out a solemn ring of smoke in his weighty resignation before crushing the cherry of the smoke between his fingers. One hand read the contact instructions on the card. The other operated the phone at his side. A woman answered in a sing-song tone.
Bellissima Hotel. How can we make your night?
Artem's resolve became granite. He chose his master's survival over his unswerving loyalty to the man's orders.
Lord Stein would like to partake of the crimson vintage offered by Papa Mac. He would like to arrange a tasting as soon as possible.
Chapter 3: Taking a Gamble.
The Bellissima, one of the most luxurious hotels in the city, was surrounded by other, less impressive hotels. On a sunny day, its ostentatious exterior with fountains, exotic plants, and cobblestone walkways through lush gardens was a sight to behold. However, when Artem arrived, it resembled a beleaguered stronghold, its many floors of lights rising into the night like dimming candles. Artem parked his car in one of the massive lots surrounding the building, each of which was a vast expanse of space with few other vehicles occupying lonely spots. He found it a bit off-putting that no one came to offer him an umbrella or any basic courtesy. The building's large portico extended to the edge of the parking lot, only 20 feet from Artem's door. It was far enough away to soak someone to the bone. The doctor released the steering wheel and took a deep breath. He had not thought to bring his umbrella, as his distraction had prevented him from thinking ahead. It was another minor annoyance that was making this encounter more unpleasant. After a short sprint, he was miserably wet and under the protection of the portico. Artem jumped as an oversized phantom loomed at him from a shadow by the doorway. The figure lit a cigarette in the gloom and took a deep drag before he spoke.
Your boss is not coming?
I'm afraid not. My master is the reason I seek to speak to your employer.
The large face of the man split into a grin.
You haven't changed much over the years, kid. You still look like someone about to be scolded.
Artem stammered, trying to rack his brain for any clue on who this person was. He had not been a kid for decades. The next pull of his cigarette caused the doctor to take a step back.
Bruno.
The large figure's mouth grew into a wider smile as streams of cigarette smoke steamed from his nostrils. The large man pulled his collar away from his neck, revealing several barely visible scars.
Yeah, kid, it's me.
Artem's fear turned to joy as he recognized his childhood friend. He embraced Bruno with his massive orangutan arms.
It's been almost 12 years since I've seen you.
You're telling me. If your father hadn't patched me up so well, I'd be 6 feet under.
They hugged for a time before Bruno pulled away.
Come on, I'll take you to my boss.
Soon he was through the doors and into the hotel lobby. It was as decorated inside as the exterior, sporting an array of pleasing adornments and exotic plant life. A small army of employees was busy caring for the lobby occupants and maintaining the business. Artem knew this was all an elaborate facade. Phoned instructions informed him of a guarded door at the far end of the lobby, and he spotted a pair of black-suited thugs flanking the only door that met the description. He made his way to them cautiously. He was on someone else's home turf and feeling exposed. When he approached the door, both men made to wave him away. Knowing this would happen, he discreetly whispered he was there by appointment, and he was expecting a very rare vintage of red. Their reactions were immediate, opening the door and escorting him inside, leaving Bruno behind. Beyond the door was a claustrophobic pale room, with a locked door at the opposite end, and shelves much like one would find in a dressing room, along both side walls. The men carefully closed the door behind him before each interposed between the exits. The guard before him spoke with a shockingly respectful tone.
We are going to search you, sir. If we find anything we don't like, you'll be asked to leave.
The man had attained the seemingly unachievable combination of an Italian accent, thuggish authority, and gentle repose. Artem nodded as he pondered how hard it must have been for a man hired for his brawn instead of his brain. Artem was searched, and his coat and hat were placed on a shelf. The two security guards did not seem to mind the water dripping from his clothes. After the initial conversation, they said nothing more. Artem wished Bruno had stayed to provide a familiar face during the upcoming negotiations, but he had stopped at the door. It was an uncomfortable experience, but it spoke to Papa Mac's need for security. What was the old gangster hiding in the hotel? And why was his boss so unconcerned and aloof when speaking to him? These and other thoughts ran through Artem's head as he wondered what would happen to him. After the thugs approved, one unlocked the far door and waved him through. The raucous noise of illicit entertainment assaulted Artem as he entered. A tangle of walkways, gambling pits, lounges, and stages lay beyond. A woman sang a catchy tune from a central stage as a band provided a beat. Smoking, drinking, and a wide variety of card games filled the room to near capacity. The place was a marvel of criminal undertaking. Gambling and alcohol had been illegal in the country for almost a decade. Casinos and bars had all shut down to avoid the ire of both local and national government agencies. Here, Artem was in the middle of a single room that stood in stark defiance of federal law. Surely this was the need for the strict security who had left, presumably to return to their posts. He approached the gambling cage and made his presence known, using the passcode and counterphrase as instructed. The scantily clad lady inside pointed out a door that led to a private meeting room for VIPs. Artem felt growing trepidation as he traversed the noisome room and emerged into a relatively quiet and unoccupied area, far from the noise and voices of the gamblers and merrymakers. Once inside, he found himself in a red velvet room with a wet bar to one side and leather seating lining the remaining walls. The room smelled of lavender with the slightest trace of copper. Artem understood the possible implications of such a subtle scent. Blood had a similar if not exact effect on the nose. Everything about this encounter was starting to worry him. 10 minutes passed before his host arrived, a well-seasoned old man with white streaks running through his otherwise typical Italian mane. Papa Mac was neither imposing nor imperious, but rather gentle and patriarchal. His red smoking jacket and high-quality clothing were the only indications of wealth or power. The old man's two companions were a different story. The tall man to his right was a stunning physical specimen with perfectly groomed hair and business attire that would make most lawyers jealous. His appearance and demeanor suggested a man forged in confidence and capability. He was a dangerous businessman who would likely be distracting if Artem had been so inclined. The other was a short woman with wild blonde hair, held back only by a pair of colorfully lensed glasses, and wearing far more mundane clothing. She was sporting a leather jacket, street clothes with jackboots, and a lot of attitude. The woman slipped behind the bar to make drinks with deft hands. The well-dressed man closed the door behind them before assuming a watchful eye over the proceedings. Papa Mac guided Artem to a seat with a gentle hand on the shoulder. The gangster smiled warmly, exposing fangs as he began his introductions.
Good to see you. The lovely lady preparing our drinks is my war-hound Palina.
The woman gave a predatory grin and a bark at her title's mention.
The gentleman minding the door is my right-hand man Lorenzo.
Lorenzo offered a brief nod to Artem.
I'm sure you know who I am, right?
Artem nodded solemnly.
You are the infamous Papa Mac.
Infamous, did you hear that?
Papa Mac looked at his companions, who all shared knowing smiles.
I like that title. Says a lot about a man who comes to ASK for favors, and still has the stones to call me infamous to my face.
I meant no disrespect.
The vampire smiled.
None taken. I happen to like people with guts.
Palina slipped around the bar to give drinks to her companions before sliding onto the bar top and pulling a bottle of vodka from beneath it for her consumption. She stretched her length across the bar and took a healthy swig from the bottle, seemingly disinterested in the proceedings. Papa Mac continued.
So how can I help Styles loyal Igor, eh?
Artem blanched at the title. Referring to him as his grandfather was a slight. It showed a lack of respect for his family.
Artem. My name is Artem Koslov. We met before.
The old man laughed at that.
I know. We met many times, but I am sure most were when you were too young to remember. When was it he had spoken to you last? I mean more than empty pleasantries.
Artem, unamused, completed the thought.
10 years ago at the meet.
Yes, that was it. I bumped into you right after in the lobby. You be Styles' secret new Wonder Doctor back then. Good to see you got your legs under ya. Your papa and your grandpappy would be proud, I'm sure.
Your papa and your grandpappy would be proud, I'm sure.
Artem, surprised by the mention of his father, felt himself jump into the conversation.
You met my father.
Met him, kiddo, and he worked closely with one another after. Back in the old days.
The old vampire's face seemed to burn with memories as he thought about the hunchback. Soon a smile broke across his face again as he continued reminiscing.
You were just a lil bambino back then. Costume went on and on about you every chance I got.
Papa Mac's tone grew solemn before he continued.
Your papa was a good man. Your grandpa was one of the best. We had a bunch of laughs over his time as your master number 2. It was a shame to see him retire.
Artem felt a wave of anger wash over him at continued disrespect for his family and the informal use of Lord Stein's first name. He wanted to lash out at the old gangster, but he had to remind himself the pleasantries and easy demeanor hid a violent man in control of the situation. Artem redoubled his efforts to get this task done. His master's life depended on his success here.
He taught me well, but his decision to go into seclusion left me to be the one to spend the plates before I was ready. My time is short. I desperately need your help and will pay what is required to gain your aid. Could we discuss it now?
If Papa Mac was put off, he didn't mention it. Instead, he maintained an easy smile and shot glances to his companions before nodding at Artem. He adjusted himself to sit back comfortably as he listened. Artem let the silence hang for an awkward moment before he began. He needed to get this right the first time. He needed to leave no openings for this criminal to gain leverage over him or distract the conversation.
I need someone to investigate a private matter for my master. Someone discreet, who can mix with mortals easily. They will be required to deal with matters as quickly as possible. Someone used to deal with unusual things.
Papa Mac's smile changed. It seemed far more genuine. Polina shook her head and drained a healthy amount from her bottle. Lorenzo chuckled once before taking a long pull from his drink.
I know just the guy.
Papa Mac relaxed.
You have no idea how much you made my day.
He snapped his fingers, summoning Lorenzo from his post at the door. The younger man produced a golden poker chip from his jacket and handed it to his boss. Papa Mac looked the chip over before offering it to Artem.
You're gonna give this to a friend. He's a detective who'll meet your needs. He'll have Lorenzo get you his address so you can find his place.
Papa Mac held it out like Judas silver for Artem to claim. Artem looked at the offered trinket for a long moment. Hiring this detective would free him to treat his master until a new arm was acquired. Hopefully, an investigation would ensure him safe access to the caches hidden among the city mortuaries his guild controlled. He had to take it. Time was too short. Artem quickly withdrew the chip from Papa Mac's hand.
What will be owed for this service?
Artem was loath to ask but needed to know the extent of his debt. Papa Mac took a long breath to collect himself before he responded.
Clearing my ledger, kiddo, and the 8 owing debts. You do this, help you out, and my soul gets a bit lighter. Besides, if this goes well, maybe your boss and he can bury Thatchet.
More confused by the answer but not wanting to press, Artem pocketed the chip and nodded his thanks to the room. Papa Mac's false smile returned as he offered a toast to Artem to complete the transaction. The doctor left the mafioso's inner sanctuary on somewhat rubbery legs, feeling the weight of the event hit him head-on. From the gangster's reputation, he had navigated a conversation that several people hadn't survived.
Chapter 4: Preparing to Strike.
The courier lay dead on the floor of the Chinatown trinket shop. His desiccated corpse twisted up in a final rictus of suffering. Trails of caustic smoke wafted from his body as the spell that undid him completed its work. The leader of the necromantic cult sat in his resplendent red robes on an ornate wooden chair. Before him lay the unfortunate messenger, wisps of smoke snaking about his body and into the base of the hookah in the leader's lap. Once the essence was contained, he imbibed it through the hookah with brief satisfaction. The leader mused that the failed courier had become useful, even as a supernatural narcotic. The dead man had delivered what should have been a deadly mixture to the damnable monstrosity who ruled the city underworld. It should have been an easy job, yet he still managed to fail. I would make his next steps more complicated. Smuggling even a few of his people into the city had been difficult. Not only had they avoided immigration, but they had also snuck past the supernatural guardians into the city. Even now, he had to maintain charms and wards against the spiritual guardians of Chinatown to move unnoticed among them. The stealth came at a high cost in resources, debts, and magical power. The goal remained the same: to infiltrate the city and take control. The Baron was a key obstacle, but the attacks on the guild morgues had weakened him. More work would be needed to remove him from power, but once done, the cult leader would reveal his followers to the council and take over the city. Much would need to be done to repay his Canadian allies for their services. Their intelligence had been vital for every step of the operation, never mind just how much more valuable it would be moving forward. While he did not fear the form in which payment would be demanded for their assistance, he knew failure would leave him weak enough for them to turn against him. He would make that matter simple: he would not fail. The shop was filled with the cult leader's loyal followers. Some were busy making the shop look like the simple store it had been before they arrived, while others were preparing the containment cages in the back room for the next phase of the plan. The sounds of hurried carpentry and the smell of fresh wood stain filled the air, something a passerby would have noticed if the shop hadn't been closed for renovations. The messenger's body was whisked away by a cult member as they moved past. It would join the shop's former owner, who had shared the same fate, in the back room. It would be there that both would be rendered into powder for use in future concoctions and spells. Everything found a purpose, and all purposes would serve his ascension as the new ruler of New York. A knock at the front door attracted the leader's attention, who moved to the door to spy on who would dare attempt an entry into his new lair. He found himself pleased with what he found. A porter wheeled a cart into the alley and pressed a shipping order against the glass door. His allies' next shipment had arrived. The porter was let in and a handful of cultists busied themselves with moving his boxes on the cart inside. The boxers, leader, and porter went into the back room, unconcerned by the macabre pair of corpses in their midst. The leader raised a wary eyebrow at the newcomer.
"You're early,"
he said. The man tipped his hat and handed over his paperwork for inspection.
"Better early than late, I think,"
he said.
"Augo Said, you'll need these for your next move."
The German accent in his voice was unmistakable.
"Your augurs are correct.
Shame about your initial attempt.
The plan has changed. One setback will lead to greater success."
The porter's eyes narrowed.
These were hard to get. It will cost you more.
The leader sneered at the upstart.
"I will pay what I feel is owed. Your friends will accept that,"
the leader said as he shoved the papers back toward the porter. The porter received his paperwork, clapped his heels with a martial flourish, and left at a clip. A communication had arrived not hours before, giving him piles of documents to rummage through. He had been mildly curious that several documents had swastikas on them, but their information seemed reliable. The boxes were simple wooden affairs. Each was the size of a thin coffin and had the stamps of the U.S. Army on each side. The paperwork signed by the leader told him what lay within: machine guns, ammunition, and grenades, a lot of each. He didn't like the application of modern weaponry but understood it would be more effective than spellcraft in the coming days. Spells could do far more harm, but required skill, time, and concentration. Firearms and explosives were a way to supplement the arcane in combat. Combat that was sure to be required to kill the serpent who ran the city. The unfortunate truth was this: with the failure of the assassination, His prey would be wary of new developments. They would be ready for a direct approach. The firepower before him would be the key to overpowering them now that they would be waiting for his next move. They may not know the nature of the threat in their midst, but they knew one existed. He would make sure they would not have time to recover from his next moves. Within a few hours, the backroom's cages would be complete. Once that was done, his cultists would begin their hunt in Chinatown. They would start with the dregs and forgotten, then move through the isolated families and loners until they had acquired enough material to create his army. In short order, his small band would be supplemented by necromantic weapons unlike anything seen in the city. He smiled, pulling a knife and a large roll of papers from his recently acquired backroom desk. Once the paperwork rolled out to sprawl over every corner of the furnishing, he found his mark. With a mad eye and all of his considerable strength, he plunged the knife through the location of Adam Stein's office. The monster's kingdom would be his.
Chapter 5 Brutal Wake-Up Call.
Most people can't see monsters. What goes bump in the night was the stuff of fairy tales and spooky stories told around the campfire. Most folks wouldn't have been able to identify a werewolf or vampire if they met them, never mind the more horrible creepy crawlers that still haunt the world. No one was quite sure how it worked. It just seemed mortal humans had a knack for explaining away the creatures they ran across as mundane. Most convinced themselves the creatures they met daily were strange neighbors or dangerous pets. Some just ignored them altogether and pretended they didn't exist. It was a supernatural power all its own, the ability to instinctively disbelieve in the truth of the world. There were plenty of twists to it though. The disbelief shtick had rules, ways to exploit those rules, and ways the rules get broken. Adding to the depth of the whole thing was that different people would treat the same supernatural critter differently, indicating each perspective changed what their brains would let them see. There were plenty of cases where monsters made contact with the world through art, prose, and the written word. An example of this would be the world-famous author working under the pseudonym of Mrs. Anne Rice. The author had been inspired by some cadaver reanimated by strange science. She had taken up writing to record the creature's memoirs and created a world-renowned collection of tales known to most mortals as tales of horror. Those tales sparked the imaginations of avid readers, inspiring further works in the genre. Trauma was another way to break the veil. A person mauled by a werewolf, attacked by a tentacled horror, or enthralled by a parasitic hive mind could have their worldview shattered. Other people without the capacity or worldly wisdom to dress the horrible in mundane guises, such as people with mental disabilities and children, saw the world as it truly was. It had been one such individual who had coined the phrase, piercing the veil. The reality was far less exciting than most people would believe. Many creatures worked 9 to 5, had kids, and paid their taxes. Some held public office, others took out the garbage. At the end of the day, most things that mortal folk ignored lived alongside them, without causing so much as a fuss. Some even looked human enough that little to no effort needed to be made to get along with them. Some mortals even started families and lifelong friendships with things that would horrify them, should they ever come to know just how strange they were. Dominic had always been able to see things as they were behind the veil. Complications in his youth had not only prevented his disbelief from kicking in but had entangled him in the world of the supernatural and kept him there his entire life. Dom's office was a worn-out shoebox worth of living space that anyone in their right mind would have left to rot. It was essentially a closet, up a short flight of creaky old stairs, just inside an old boarding house. It was an old zoning abomination created by the building's previous owner, a guy named Howard Horwitz. He had zoned it as a business office attached to his tenement. When the old man passed, his wife took over the building, but she left it filled with mold-covered memories of a happy life, long since lost to rot. When Dom returned from the war, he, like many of the men who served, came back shell-shocked and unsuited to most forms of human interaction. It didn't help that he ended up hard on his luck after drinking his money away. Mrs. Horwitz had been looking to sort the random clutter her renters would leave behind when they got kicked to the curb. As luck would have it, she had found him passed out on her front stairs. He was covered in a layer of frost from the harsh New York winter around the same time she had decided to clear out her hated addition. She harangued him into helping her sort it for a couple of bucks. Seeing an opportunity, he had offered to liquidate the forgotten goods if he could use the office. She had come round and finally agreed to let him squat there if he quietly kept to himself. She was a nice woman once you got past her grating voice and intimidating demeanor. Hell, Dom would still be on the street if not for the withered husk of a room he had acquired. He had kept some furniture and a few baubles, all of which decorated the place. It amounted to a filing cabinet, a few mismatched chairs, shelves, and a desk. The desk was the only thing that had held any value in its life, being an Edgar Woodsman Chattanooga chamber desk. It was a broad thing that, if restored, could fetch a pretty penny. Dom had held onto it, replacing the missing leg with a few books, and throwing a quick polish over the well-abused top. Dom's poor habits had liberally coated the room in empty liquor bottles and a variety of empty food containers. The business had been scarce when he started his little venture and had eventually dried up a short while ago. When he got back from Europe, his demons became greater than he could handle on his own. They brought him deeper and deeper into the bottle, as he contended with the despair of outliving so many of his friends. If it weren't for his diminutive partner, he would have given up. Having someone who needed him forced him to reconsider dying alone and unmourned, and thus, his plans included starting a new life. He had been so hollowed out from the war, he wanted to do something, anything, to help bury those nightmare-inducing memories. It hadn't helped that the troubles he had run from by joining the army were waiting for him when he returned to the city after 4 years. He found work attached to the NYPD field he thought he could manage easily, and he was good at it. The trouble he found came after a string of jobs came his way that had him chasing wives around town looking into their secret affairs and lovers. That work ate at his soul enough that he started turning the work down, leaving it to people with fewer scruples. That decision had put his business on life support. The nail in the coffin came when he blew a case. He had been tracking a guy down for a worried father. His client had been an influential man who made regular donations to the police retirement fund. When Dom finally found the kid dead in a warehouse and couldn't explain what had happened, the father made sure to tell every precinct chief in the city. The rest of his work dried up in an instant. It hadn't helped that he knew what happened to the kid. No father should ever have to deal with that. Dom was passed out, half strewn across his desk, an empty bottle of illicit whiskey gripped in one hand. The door flew open with enough force to smash into the nearby cabinet. A few stray bottles fell from the top and shattered on the floor. Dom heard the noises from his slumber and decided to ignore them. He hadn't been able to sleep for days. His body was desperate for a chance to recover from his self-abuse. Something scuttled across the room. Dom heard the drawers of his desk scrape open one at a time before something clambered up them to get to the top of his desk. It plopped down next to his head before opening something with the sound of papers rustling. The edges of the daily paper clumsily flopped onto his face. Dom's mind was waking, even as he desperately tried to force it back to sweet, sweet darkness and sleep. Then the voice came. It was comically squeaky, with a hint of something dark and ominous hiding beneath it. Its owner had no sense of volume, nor courtesy enough to speak well away from a man trying so hard to get a little rest.
They're saying the rain is staying for a whole week. Can you believe that, boss? This keeps up, I'll mold away to nothing.
The voice was torture to Dom's ears. He grimaced as he hoped something would make the noise stop. The pages fluttered.
Looks like the Yanks took another loss too. They keep doing that. They got no shot at the championships this year.
The invader slapped the page with the back of their hand. The noise caused Dom's face to twist in pain.
And with the Tigers doing so well, they could steal it all this year. Figures Detroit's a motor town though. That's cars, right? Anywho, they found some time to play ball. 'Cause they were doing too good for anyone else in the league to handle.
This continued as the desk squatter read every article title aloud, adding a brief synopsis. One of Dom's eyes rolled open in direct violation of Dom's standing orders. The new torture of light and color racked his mind like a bat to the forehead. He lost his battle against consciousness and began stirring. It was bad enough that he had to hear the ruckus, but now he had to spend the effort focusing on his terrible surroundings. He cursed his senses for existing. The traitorous parts of his body had dragged him back to reality. His mood soured further when the pangs of his hangover mugged him like a gang of thugs. His booze-borne hangover had been more polite than the squeaking menace but far more vicious. His head pounded, his bones ached, and a wave of nausea crept in to finish the masterwork of suffering. Dom struggled through it long enough to pry his head from the desk. He tried in vain to rub his head pain away with tired hands as his corpse-stiff body leaned back in his chair. Another day had started. In some muddled attempt at revenge for waking him, he tossed the bottle he had slept gripping toward the source of all the damned noise. He heard it shatter somewhere beyond the desk on the floor. The voice continued uninterrupted. Damn, Dom thought. It would have been nice to briefly end the chatter long enough to find something else to throw. The noise grated on.
Several people missing in Chinatown. Wonder if they are just on vacation? Rain flooding the storm drains all across town. Homeless plague the city streets.
Dom's other eye, jealous of all the fun its partner was having, opened and the world came into view. Everything was just as awful as he remembered it. The furniture was still in dire need of some paint, the walls were still peeling, the ceiling stained from Mr. Patterson's leaky tub, and his partner was reading the paper. Jackie had become attached to him during his time in the service. They had come home together from the war. He was an annoying pest that seemed to have afflicted Dom like a curse from some mischievous higher power. He was also a walking, talking pumpkin. It was stranger than that. Sure, he would have been seen as a loon hauling around a strange gourd and calling it his partner, but at least that would have been normal. Unfortunately, Jackie was a little more than that. Jackie was a small thing, at half Dom's height. His orange head was well out of proportion with the rest of his body and sported carved eyes and a mouth like a jack-o'-lantern. Those carved holes moved to accommodate his wild shifts in mood and squeaky speech. The rest of him was a mass of twisted vines that reasonably approximated the human form. The occasional small leaf or loose end poked out of the sleeves and collar of his neat attire: shined shoes, pressed slacks, suspenders, buttoned-up three-button jacket, and fedora. His outfit was an uncanny representation of one of Jackie's favorite people. A dark and eldritch fire burned inside Jackie's head. It was the kind of light that would drive a person to madness should they gander at it too long. It had color, light, and heat, sure, but none quite fit into reality. Every time Dom got a good long look at it, he was reminded about how they had met another nightmare in the pile. Jackie was now Dom's partner in business, which meant he followed Dom around like a yapping dog while Dom looked for work. The dimwit had adapted well to city life. He had the look, the accent, and the burning desire to experience life as a hard-boiled detective. But in the end, he was too damn silly to pull it off. Dom's body got the idea that food was an immediate need. It was a fair assessment, as Dom couldn't remember the last time he had eaten. By his reckoning, it may have been a day or two. His arm moved of its own accord in a fumbling attempt to plumb the depths of his topmost drawer. After a few seconds, it produced a crumpled bill and a couple of coins. The money was flung at his partner, bouncing off him and rolling about on the desk.
Sandwich
was the only word Dom could muster as a sternly given order. Words were hard at.
Hangover o'clock.
Jackie shut his trap, dropped the paper, and came to attention. He saluted his boss before scooping up the meager pay. A moment later, he hopped off the desk and headed out the open door. Blissful silence filled Dom's world. He bathed in the lack of sensory overload as his head lolled around over the back of his chair. He stared at the ceiling. mentally willing to make the day better than his last. Glass crunched under someone's heel. Dom could hear Mrs. Horwitz wishing Jackie a good day. She thought Jackie was a wonderful boy. She, like most people, had convinced herself Jackie was a cute little kid, no different than other tykes around town. The two noises came from different sources. Dom became suddenly alert. His senses all went online as his head snapped toward the door. He spotted a man in a wet coat and a low-hanging hat, edging sideways through his door. The man had to come through sideways. Its arms were so large using a door normally would be a chore. The thing had the proportions and attire of a civilized gorilla trying to blend in. Dom sat straight in his chair and instinctively sought out the billy club he kept under his desk. The big guy reeked of trouble and he wanted no part in its plans for him. Before he could fully prepare, it removed its sodden hat and spoke.
Greetings. I am Dr. Atem Koslov. I am.
Dom's guest looked about the office, then down at the glass strewn about the floor, before continuing with disgust on his hard features.
Here in regards to a mutual friend who informed me you would be of some assistance in some delicate matters.
Dom straightened himself out and slicked his hair back before throwing up his best customer smile.
That would be me. Detective Dominic at your service.
Chapter 5 Part 2 of Storming Babylon.
Jackie hummed as he reached the end of the sidewalk, tipping his hat to passersby. Most of them gave him a horrified look before their faces twisted slightly as they mentally rewrote what they saw into something less freakish than an animated pumpkin. When he reached the corner, he saw a familiar red, hairy body with a large leathery wing trying to deflect most of the falling water. Quote,
"Hey Jersey, what's up?"
he asked. The Jersey Devil was still holding a nearly empty bottle of stolen alcohol in the claws of one of its wings. The creature was having a hard time keeping its head straight enough to focus on the pumpkin as it smiled up at him.
"Jackie, go away. I'm not doing nothing."
The beast growled.
"I haven't accused you of nothing."
Yeah, you never accuse me of nothing, but then you tell your boss about all the nothing I'm doing, and he gets mad and asks me questions.
Okay then. If the boss gives you such a hard time, why do you hang round here?
Well, because he doesn't let people eat me.
Jackie rubbed his pumpkin chin while thinking about it.
Because you smell like you went swimming in the sewer?
No, Jackie, it's because.
Oh, you mean because you look like a giant bat mummy and everyone who's looking at you would be afraid? And you think fear would make them hungry enough to think you are a giant bit of bat jerky? I don't think that's how it works, bud.
The Jersey Devil dropped the bottle, shattering the glass on the ground, as it rubbed its temples trying to work out the sudden aching headache that developed every time he talked to the pumpkin.
Just because you're protected doesn't mean the rest of us get the same.
But you is protected, Jersey. Boss saved you last month when he tracked your silly tush to where you had camped out to drink his stolen booze near the open sewer.
The ugly creature did his best to imitate a look of wounded pride as the pipsqueak pumpkin continued humming happily to himself.
Yeah, Jackie, yeah. I seem to have fewer giant lizards trying to get chunks out of me when I hang around close to your boss. You know, as long as I'm not trying to steal his hooch.
With that, the Jersey Devil hopped off his perch and started hobbling down the alley to avoid further interrogation from Jackie. After the conversation concluded, the pernicious pumpkin went about his business. The sound of dice hitting rain-slick concrete stopped him in his tracks. Listening, he deduced that the sound originated from within the alley a vine's reach away. He poked his gourd around the corner to get a better look, finding a gaggle of goblins throwing dice for money, not 20 feet from him. He decided to make his presence known. Their leader, goblin leaders, always wore the largest and most ridiculous hat, stood to face the approaching pumpkin with a savage snarl. A well-bedraggled top hat covered in feathers and other nonsense stabbed into every available surface of it. He'd have been intimidating if his stature was anywhere over 3 feet.
Who goes there?
He started with a pirate's droll. Jackie was all grins as he sauntered down the alley to have a face-off with one of the few creatures in New York smaller than himself.
I see you guys have a game going. Do you mind if I play a couple of rounds?
We don't take kindly to your clean and civil presence among us denizens of skullduggery and downright criminal behavior.
Eloquent verbiage flowed like a confused avalanche from the tiny monster's mouth.
No, no. You got me all wrong. You see, I would like to sit in with my pal Mad Green Jack.
As Jackie spoke, he produced a $5 bill from his vest pocket and snapped it taut before the goblin's nose.
If in it ain't ill-gotten, then what why I have there is no more than civilized slave wages, sir.
You still misunderstand. Old Honest Abe here was an unknowing donation made by a well-to-do client who offered it to me when he just kinda left it as easy pickings in his billfold where any sticky vines could snag it.
After a tense silence, the goblin leader gave a mighty squeak of laughter, slapped Jackie on the arm, and waved him into the game. As they both waited for the current round to finish, Jackie started a conversation to pass the time.
I have seen you guys around. Youse clean up that Panteos theater for Lorenzo, right?
Pantomime theater it be. And we do so to stay afloat till the wind sees us on our way.
You guys do a fine job of keeping the place sparkly. You get paid well. Papa Mac has never been a slouch at paying wages. So why are you guys out here throwing dice in an alley?
The goblin, who stalled his response only to introduce himself as Smig, looked offended.
He pays us the wages we earn, for the sweat of our brows. And gives us mediocre peasantry to be sure, but why we gamble is knowledge not meant for the uninitiated, for we crave something more than a handout of his generosity. So we take the offerings of his wallet and give it to people of the city who perceive us as mortal urchins and think they can swindle tykes.
That's nice.
Then we rob em.
Wait, what?
Mug em even. If they try to take advantage of us, then they're bad blokes. It is their fault for having our wealth on hand in the face of a gang o' goblins.
The other goblins cheered at the words.
But ya gave him that cash.
Yep, then we took it right back by blade, fist, and terror. The only valuables in this world are ill-gotten gains.
The gathered goblins cheered loudly at the boast. Jackie decided at that moment that goblins were strange folk. Then he put his $5 bill into the ante and rolled some dice with them. Few of them even noted the vines slowly slipping coins out of their pocket the whole while.
Chapter 7 Old Friends and Colleagues.
Adam awoke alone in his office. He was still strapped down to the medical table and feeling markedly better than he had for days. The good doctor was nowhere to be seen, leaving the giant alone with his thoughts. The sound of someone rising from the corner of the room made him turn his head. The sight of the well-dressed undead gangster was rare but not unwelcome. Adam sat up, carelessly tearing the straps that held him down a moment before. His hair needed to be fixed in such a company. He pressed back the hair from his face. His eyes remained on his guest as he finally found some choice words for his council compatriot.
This is a surprise, Giovanni. Are you here to part me out now that I'm a mess?
Papa Mac stepped into the light of the surgical lamps with a tactical grin.
You've been a mess a long time, Stitches. Ain't worth the effort to toss your mismatched mag out to quit yet. Besides, you got bigger problems.
Do tell.
The banter was playful, but the subtlety of inflection the two shared was a long-developed thing. After all, Giovanni had taught him about sincerity, the old-world concept of saying something other than what you mean, but without lying.
You got your Igor in over his head, Adam. He's running around town picking up ears and eyeballs wherever he goes.
Iger, are you still mistaking Artem for his grandfather?
The vampire cocked his head in mockery at that.
Then see us dead flesh still. Your boy a trem reached out to mend mine. He got us worried, so I figured this sneak in and look at ya. Can't have you longing about we let the rest of us go about honest work.
There it was, the telltale headache that came each time Giovanni was up to his regular antics. Adam had never come to terms with how childish the mob boss could be. He had been this way since the bad old days when he first arrived in America. Back then his gambling was far more deadly, but he eventually softened as he became more of a man of means. What had always been strange were his minions. Almost everyone was cut from stern cloth, quite the opposite of the papa. Even the silver-tongued Lorenzo was a capable professional. The only scenario Adam could ever imagine bringing such a meticulous group under the mafioso was one in which they desired to care for him, like some burdensome elder. He suspected vampire mafia culture was strange enough to justify its thesis in social sciences, and there were many layers beneath those observable to him. In the century they had known each other, he had never been able to see anything more than the surface of their integral relations with one another. He let out a resigned sigh and growled a curt response.
We have a lobby. You could have come in like everyone else. Aside from that, accusing me of laxity when you barely raise your voice at meets, nor do much more than run your tiny gambling empire that is rich.
Giovanna slapped Adam's shoulder with a catty grin.
You wound me, stitches. My very legitimate business pays a hell of a lot more to the council than them thespians or the flea beater, and the meets are a great place to catch an up, so I take advantage.
Adam found his attire and started donning it as he continued the conversation. He had to nod in fair acceptance of Giovanni's point. His casino alone paid the land taxes and service fees for Babylon last year.
I will be the last to say you don't do anything to help, but you should be more concerned with the meat policy.
Giovanni chuffed.
Whenever I try to put my 2 cents in on the day-to-day affairs, you keep smacking me down thinking I'm trying to get in for a grift. After a while, it just became easier to keep my yap shut.
Adam wanted to return to the subject.
What did Adam get himself into?
That lil bambino of yours showed up scared half to death. Was willing to sign any deal so you could keep your ticker talking.
I will have to have a talk with him about this.
Not this time. Kiddo spilled the beans. You fall into pieces and running out of ways to get more. Stop keeping him trapped under your wing while I play the martyr.
Giovanni Machiavelli, your advice is unwelcome. We may be associates, but that will change if you try to push me around like one of your bar floozies.
Stein knew this play. He had seen many fall for it. Friendly advice slowly descended to strong suggestions, demand, and then total control. It was Papa Mac's signature style. Giovanni snapped back with matching venom, letting pretense slip away.
Il do as please you past dated pile of bolts. You should know by now that I tell you what needs to be said. This ain't New Amsterdam anymore, we ain't enemies. We ain't no associates. We fought and bled together on these streets. You best call me friends. The alternative is a lot worse.
The adage was something to the order of keeping friends close and enemies closer. What it forgot to mention was that enemies could become the most irritating of friends given enough time in proximity. Adam wanted to take the mobster down a peg but knew Papa Mac's words were as genuine as the man could manage, so words would have to do.
So this is a friendly visit, is it?
That, and a touch of professional courtesy as well. In putting my boy on the case.
Adam raised an eyebrow in earnest shock. It had been a long time since Giovanni had even mentioned his son. The last known relations between them were distant and strained. There had been something about his son returning from the war with a chip on his shoulder. This was an interesting morsel of information.
You have rekindled relations with your son.
Mac's eyes grew dark.
Not quite. Let's just say he's an associate.
That's not what I meant.
This city needs you alive and kicking. I trust them pups at Themis to chase tail more than fin clues. The choice was obvious.
Adam turned to a nearby table to get his cufflinks but realized he didn't have a reason to wear one of the matching pairs. Papa Mac helped him into his shirt and buttoned the heavily starched garment. Adam racked his brain for a long moment, trying to formulate a plan to pry more information from his friend. When he looked back at where Mac had been standing, he found himself alone in the room. The villain had pulled one of his famous disappearing acts. Papa Mac never changed. He was always the prankster with a flair for the dramatic.
Damn you, Machiavelli.
Chapter 8 Happy Trails.
The cab drove up to the rain-slick curb and deposited Dominic and Jackie. The two had been left in front of a midtown morgue called Happy Trails Mortuary and Crematorium. Its exterior lights flickered from weather abuse and disrepair. Its paint was peeling and unattractive. Everything about the place screamed.
Go away.
Jackie was talking. He hadn't stopped talking since they were forced to walk to Tony's Delicatessen to get Dom a ham and Swiss on rye.
And then I told this kid PB&J ain't no sandwich. The kid was confused, so I explained that the butter and jelly are like sauces. They can be tasty, but ya need some bulk to the thing. I told the kid to get some bananas or something to put on there. Sheesh, even some Spam would be better than nothing at all.
Dom ignored his annoying companion's monologue and stopped in his tracks. Something seemed off. He tilted his head and slowly examined every detail of the building. Finally, he spotted some of the reasons for his unease.
"Shut up, Jackie. Something's not right,"
he said in his no-nonsense tone. Jackie clammed up and started looking around with sly eye holes. The door was closed. The place looked as ready for business as it would ever be, but the "closed" sign hung crookedly in the window. Most folks wouldn't see it, but the door was kicked in and then mostly put back together afterward. The attempt was good enough no one would see damage unless you walked right up to the door. Taking cautious steps, he gently pushed the wooden door, letting it swing inside before peeking around the corner. No bullets rang out from gunmen hidden in unseen dark corners and deep shadows. No monsters ran out with teeth gnashing at him. The sterile lobby of the mortuary appeared to be empty. A vacant receptionist's desk was in front of large double doors. Long benches lined the waiting area, and old magazines sat unread. As Dom approached the desk, the chemical smell was no longer strong enough to mask the more concerning stench, the coppery smell of blood. It was fresh and hung in the air like a bad omen. Dom slowly opened the swinging doors to avoid noise. Once there was enough space for him, Jackie squeezed through with his casual demeanor, silent as anything. Dom was through an instant later and the duo advanced quietly into a long hallway. Hanging signs indicated what each room was used for. When the pair reached a room marked autopsies, the smell became overwhelming. The smell of old blood and death wafted to him from the door to the back room. It was too much on his senses to stay focused, so Dom took a moment to soak a handkerchief in a dram from his hip flask. After applying it to his face, he continued toward the back door. Once he swung the door open, his stomach lurched. Dom had been around plenty of deaths of a variety of causes. He had seen the gruesome and the sad. He had the will and stomach to get through any charnel house he ran across in his line of work. This tested his limits. The entire staff lay on the floor. 7 in all, arranged into a ritualistic pattern. Heads met in the middle, their remaining appendages radiated like some sort of horrid fleshy star. Hoses and machines had been crudely jabbed into their flesh to allow fluids to pass from one corpse to the other before meeting an outlet line. That line stretched across the floor and over the lip of a big wash basin stained on the inside with horrid black tar that must have once been blood. The bodies were not just killed, they were desiccated. These folks looked more like the mummies you see in the traveling shows than people. Something bad happened to these people, beyond the obvious of losing their blood and being laid out to die. Cadavers still lay open on 2 examination tables, as if the morticians had been suddenly interrupted mid-operation. Tools and cleaning implements were scattered across the floor. A ceiling light fluttered in its precariously dangling housing. Dom braced himself and moved through the carnage. His eyes scanned everything from ceiling to gutter. He suddenly found himself at the basin. The basin was stained as if it had once been full of awful tar-like blood. Now, less than half a foot of a core remained inside. What was in that tub wasn't right. There was no method of drainage to account for it being emptied and no heat causing it to bubble and steam. It wasn't just rotten, it was tainted. Dom shook his head at the thought. He was no occultist but was ready to chalk this up as some result of the dark arts. He needed an expert's opinion. Sadly, he only had Jackie, but he would have to do. Refocusing himself, Dom took some time to take a good look at the staff laid out on the floor. It only took a moment to spot a yellowed letter and a small string of green stone beads placed carefully under the head of the head mortician. Dom generally knew better than to disturb a crime scene. In cases where things other than mortals got involved, he made exceptions. What the cops didn't know couldn't hurt everyone. Grabbing an unused surgical glove from a nearby rack, he carefully lifted the corpse's head in one hand. He reached his free hand down to get the paper and string. The door burst open and Jackie walked in like it was a normal Tuesday.
Sheesh, boss. The equipment closet is locked up, unless ya have long fingers that can pull the latch. I didn't see any weirdos skulking about either. Boss?
Dom was shocked into a new awkward pose with one triumphant hand raised in the air with the found clues gripped firmly. His gloved hand wriggled a bit as it balanced on the face of another corpse, and his legs had twisted around to look quite ridiculous.
Jackie. Get me out of this so I can kick some new holes in that face of yours.
Jackie shrugged before extending his seemingly endless and surprisingly robust vines out from his jacket's arms. He plucked Dom Man up and away from the circle. The vines took the time to place him upright and dust off his shoulders before retreating into his innocent-looking sleeves. The whole time Jackie rambled on with his regular nonsense, this time regarding Dom's ability to get into strange situations involving bad smells.
Thanks, Jackie.
The pumpkin took on a serious look, offering his best Navy salute. Dom sighed, using the free moment to gander at the mess.
I know you took something, Jackie. Your sticky fingers found loot, I can see it on your face. You gotta stop doing that at crime scenes, partner. Jackie sheepishly held up bandages and medical supplies before hiding them again in his coat. Dom sighed, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Jackie, finally realizing what was in the room with them, piped up.
Holy cripes, boss! I ain't seen a mess this bad since the Creepy McCreep's Halloween radio special last year.
Dom was already taking another, more thorough look about the room.
Heard, Jackie. You heard it, bud. You did not see a radio show.
Course ya heard, boss. It was on the radio. But anyhow, when Dr. Crenshaw Murdilator was found in his lab with his demon ritual buddies, it looked just like this.
You heard about something like this last. Wait, why don't I remember that?
Jackie shrugged.
You were visiting Papa Mac at his casino. But anyhow.
Jackie continued to ramble on about the Halloween special, losing all context of the horrors of the room. While he talked, he failed at a nonchalant scamper over to the ritually sacrificed bodies and started to raid pockets as secretly as he could, which was still about as obvious as his big orange head. Dom growled at Jackie.
Jackie, stop robbing the dead folks. We're on a case. This is a crime scene, you idiot. Just messin' with it could let whoever did this get away.
It's a who, boss.
The pumpkin uttered a bit sheepishly. Something was making Jackie's emotional responses a bit out of whack. Dom had seen it one other time, one bad night before. Dom pressed a few more horrid memories from his past away for now and decided to grill Jackie to get him to regain his focus.
Jackie, do you smell anything weird around here like that night in that docking warehouse last year?
Viney tendrils stopped mugging the dead for their pocket change. They slowly returned to their regular positions as the pumpkin scratched its orange chin in thought.
Yeah. This is some sort of magic, boss. Bad stuff. Like the kind where you borrow some power from something that doesn't belong, something that isn't safe to have around people, like, at all.
Dom continued to review the scene, memorizing what he couldn't write down on the tiny notepad he always kept in his jacket pocket for casework. Jackie looked around the room like a bored child stuck in a doctor's office.
Hey, boss! I found a cool button.
Dom's head snapped to where Jackie stood, but he was too late. Jackie, wait a minute. Dom braced himself for whatever trap Jackie may have sprung. Places like this always seem to have at least one to deter snoops. He was almost disappointed when nothing happened. He walked over to join Jackie when his panic subsided. The wall silently slid back and away, revealing a small hidden room. The walls and interior were bathed in a strange fluorescent blue glow and smelled of strong chemicals. On shelves in the room, large jars had tubes sprouting from them and all connected to some sort of device that whirred quietly. Various organs occupied the jars, impaled on the tubes. All the organs were black, and black ooze traveled around the jars like a horrid lava lamp. On an operating table, metal bins held arms, legs, feet, and the like in a similar state wired to the machine, withered black and leaking black ooze into the bins. Dom took a moment to take another dram from his whiskey and reapplied a bit to his handkerchief before he slowly entered the secret space. He was doing some investigative math in his head. A mortuary with a secret room filled with spare parts was something unusual, to say the least. Someone had it in for his new employer's boss. As he entered, he noticed several drawers camouflaged into the wall to one side. Jackie was already scampering about the place, ogling the jars and twitching a bit. Dom figured the twitch was that magic sense of Jackie's kicking into high gear. With some poking around, they discovered the drawers contained a bunch of well-organized mannequin parts and tools to modify them. The machine itself was about the size of a family radio, consisting of a metal box with knobs and lights poking out of it from all over. Dom took more notes. Adam was a wealthy man, but not quite a man, in the biological sense. Legend has it that Dr. Frankenstein's most famous creations were an assortment of parts. It was reasonable to assume those parts would need to be replaced from time to time. This was a glimpse into Adam Stein's closet of skeletons, a view into the darker nature of the city's wealthiest monster. It now made more sense why Dr. Koslov had asked Dom to look into the mortician disappearances. He would need to add a new folder about how Adam had used the mortuaries to maintain his body. Dom surmised that Adam replaced stolen pieces of the dead with mannequin parts to disguise the morgue's clandestine operation. It was clever. With the tools in this place, people could get away with an open casket and onlookers would be none the wiser. Digging deeper through the drawers, Dom found a list containing copies of death certificates. Each had a section,
Donate to Science,
highlighted, along with a note that included the name of an organ or body part. Clever. Should the morgue get raided or exposed, these papers would cover any legal dispute over the missing parts. It also listed sums of money given to grieving families. The money paid for surgery to heal the sick, even when letting them die, would have likely made Adam's shopping list shorter. Adam was a much-loved figure in the city. These kinds of actions spoke volumes about him.
Jackie, let's get out of here and check around the outside of this place again. I gotta close the wall back up.
Jackie nodded and shuffled off to the lobby. He was mumbling something under his breath, contorting his vines into a makeshift puppet, and shaking a finger at it sternly.
What was that, smart guy?
Nothing, boss,
lied Jackie, sticking his arms behind his back. Dom retreated and pushed the hidden button again. The cold storage wall swung back into place with a quiet click. A local PD forensics team would never notice the button or discover the parts lab behind the wall. In short order, the detectives were out the door.